This is Criteria.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Criteria. My name is Thomas Miras, and I'm here with my pal James Majewski. Hello, James.
Hello, Thomas. That's me.
And we're here to discuss one of my very favorite movies. This is a top 5 movie for me. Is it a top 5 movie for you?
It's like easily top 10.
Okay.
It's sweet. It's a good movie.
Okay, it's sweet. It's a real sweetie pie. It's called The Night of the Hunter. It came out in 1955, was directed by Charles Laughton, who is otherwise known as an actor, British-American actor, and this was his sole feature that he directed. And it stars Robert Mitchum, who we've seen before in Out of the Past, Shelley Winters, and Lillian Gish, who we saw before in Intolerance.
Right.
She was the woman rocking the cradle in all of those.
Young Lillian Gish.
Yeah, in those interludes. It's based on a novel by Davis Grubb, and the screenplay is by Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist James Agee, who also wrote the screenplay for The African Queen. Also very important, the director of photography was Stanley Cortez, a great American cinematographer who also did the cinematography on The Magnificent Ambersons, a movie I'd love to discuss on this podcast sometimes, Orson Welles film. But this is just, this movie gives me chills whenever I watch it.
Yeah.
In a way that few do. The first time I saw it was one of the most visceral, physical effects a film has had on me, particularly one sequence. Well, and it's
not an unknown film by any means.
No.
It's widely regarded as part of the canon of great film, but I've found that a lot of people have not seen this movie. And before seeing it myself, someone showed it to me. I had never heard of it.
Right.
So what would be, for those of our viewers who haven't seen it or might not be familiar with the film, what do you think would be the one-line pitch on why they should watch this movie? Yeah,
that's a great question. I like to describe it as kind of it's a mix of a bunch of different things, because it has aspects that are almost like a horror movie. It has a visual style that's very expressionistic and film noir, but it has this kind of fairy tale feeling to a lot of segments, and it also is kind of cosmic in its scope. And so those are kind of the stylistic things, but then thematically, it's this beautiful film about the sacred. I would describe it as being about kind of the sacredness of purity of heart and the innocence of children, and also true and false prophets, basically. I mean, that's how the film is framed right in the beginning. And it's a movie of dueling people using the Satan quoting the Bible to his own purposes, and then an authentically, Christian woman.
Right. So a quick synopsis of the film might be that Robert Mitchum plays who appears to be a traveling preacher man, but he's actually something of a con man and a serial killer. He very well might think that he has an authentic kind of relationship with God, but he's all the more crazy and sinister for it.
Right.
And he comes to a small town, and in particular to a family whose father and husband had just gone away to prison and had been hung for murder and bank robbery, and had left the money with his family, basically in the custody of his children, making them swear that they would tell no one where this money is, not even their mother. So this preacher man, played by Robert Mitchum, comes to find out about this money while in prison, and is now come looking for it. So that's what sets up a lot of the tension and the dramatic irony, because we know that the children know where the money is, and he knows that the money is still here somewhere, but the adults around don't know that this man is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And it's a really tense film, but one that's also, despite its dark themes, somehow manages to still feel I don't know. I describe it as every once in a while you see a movie that feels like it's a children's film for adults. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it has the perspective of a child. And so there's something that's maybe charming is too light of a word.
Mm-hmm.
It's very compelling because it's sort of dealing with things on the most like fundamental level.
Right.
And yet, it's not necessarily a children's film because of the subject matter that it deals with.
It's definitely not.
Right. But it's one that you could see a child really understanding, you know what I mean? And something worth adding to that is just that it deals with this darkness without sort of muddying itself. I think when we watched it, I said, you don't feel dirty watching, this film that
maybe as opposed to some other films about serial killers or things like that.
Right.
Yeah, it's quite a remarkable film. There's another aspect of it too, which is, this is a Hollywood film from the 1950s, and yet it feels very much like an indie film or something. It's very unique stylistically. It's doing its own thing. And unfortunately, it was not well received critically. It's become, hailed as a classic since then. But the initial reviews were not very good. And they're really one of the great tragedies of film history is that because it so discouraged Charles Laughton that he never directed another film. And I think this is one of the greatest films ever made. And so the fact that he only made one, still upsets me to this day.
Well, it is very upsetting because his vision is so clear and singular in this film.
Yeah.
There's such a bold sort of directorial language that he's using, both visually and thematically. And using to tremendous effect that you just kind of get this impression of a real visionary director, and someone who was working with great freedom to pursue a very clear, line of inquiry and interest. And so I do wonder what would have come had he been allowed to or felt encouraged to continue to pursue that work, Yeah, it's too bad.
So the film, it has this strange beginning right off the bat because we're in, the stars. We've got this shot of the night sky and the stars, and then all of these faces of an old woman played by the Lillian Gish character, surrounded by faces of just children. They're not characters in the film; they're just sort of a cross section of children, whatever. Listening to her. And she is sort of giving a Bible lesson, just throwing together a lot of verses that aren't seemingly all related at first, but they're all sort of connected to the themes of the film. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, but beware of false prophets. She's quoting different things that our Lord said in the Gospels, and then we switch to these kind of this sinister music and this kind of these moving overhead, way overhead shots. I guess they must be helicopter shots or something, of this, these towns and villages, and sort of coming down on these children playing. Again, these are not characters in the film, but we see these children playing and finding a woman's body in a cellar. And that introduces us to our serial killer character, who we then see going down the road in his car and having a number of sort of horrifying, what he thinks of as conversations with the God, but probably conversations with the devil, sort of talking about what his plans are going to be. And we get the information that his thing is going around and weaning his way into the trust of widows. Whether he marries them all, I don't know, but and then killing them and taking their savings. And then we get a little bit more information about this character when we see him in a strip joint. And this is the 1950s, so it's not that explicit. But he's sitting there, but he's angry at what he's seeing, and he's got his knife, and that's when he gets arrested because he had stolen a car.
Yeah. But it's an important part of his
sort of sexual repression and
because
anger at women.
There's clearly some kind of like ambivalence there, because he's at this joint,
Right.
sitting there watching, but he's also getting angry. And, he has this line about perfumed things with curls, being the thing that God detests.
Right.
So there's like a real misogyny in this character that ends up being significant.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know that's like the initial sequence of sort of scenes. I don't know where exactly it goes from there immediately, but well, I guess the next big thing is the scene where the father comes in just after having shot two men and robbed them, and this really intense scene where he makes his children, but particularly the older of his two children, his son, swear this oath not to tell anybody. Well, the oath is that his oath is that he will, the older brother has to guard his younger sister Pearl with his life, and he'll never tell about the money. And this is just the weight of this oath is on this boy for the entirety of the film. It doesn't really seem to affect the daughter in the same way because she's too young to really like understand it. But the weight of this like ongoing sort of obligation towards his father is something that is part of the one of the more poignant aspects of the film for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think because it's what kind of it puts him in this position where he's completely alone.
Yeah,
because he can't tell anybody about what he's going through.
Yeah, well, and that loneliness is sort of emphasized by the host of other adult characters that we're introduced to throughout the film. So there's obviously his mother, who is the widow that is left behind. But there's also some townspeople. There's an elderly couple that is sort of, I think the mother works for them at their candy shop. And so they're always sort of involved in the family and giving this like solicited or unsolicited advice. There's a kindly old man who works down by the river repairing boats and fishing, but he's also a bit of a drunkard, and just a handful of other minor characters. But the point that I want to make here is just that all of them kind of fail these children in some significant way, whether it's a sort of concern for appearances, or if it's like in the case of that man who's the drunkard, if it's a kind of depression, or if maybe there's a cynicism about marriage, we get that expressed at one point, or in the case of the mother, maybe a naivete, or a over concern for, or an over need for validation or vindication, from what happened to her late husband.
Yeah,
all of these things are kind of gaps in the armor that leave these children vulnerable, and the whole community susceptible to the manipulations of this wolf in sheep's clothing. And so I think that that's an interesting part of the film as well, because this young boy, aside from being the one who's tasked with the responsibility of keeping this secret, of keeping the money safe, he's also really kind of let down by everybody, and has to really fend for himself.
It's also set in the Great Depression. I didn't mention that, and that kind of plays into the wider theme of like children just like wandering on their own and being vulnerable.
Well, it's ironic because when we meet the father at the beginning, and he's in prison speaking to Robert Mitchum's character, he's saying, that he's that's what moved him to commit the robbery, was seeing all these poor children, and sort of vowing to himself that would never be for his children, that they would never be homeless like that. Right. Well, it's ironic because that is where they end up. Right. They end up on the river trying to escape this madman after he has killed their mother, and made his intentions clear. There's a great line after pretty much every adult has failed them, and finally the children run away. That he runs to Uncle Bertie. That's the name of the old drunk man who told them, if you're ever in a bind, come see your Uncle Bertie. He goes and finds him passed out on the floor. he has this great line where he says, "There's still the river." And so this is like the last resort. There's just the river. And this is a very like kind of like Mark Twain-esque move here.
Sure.
You know, it feels real Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn,
right,
you know,
right.
to just take to the river. And that's another thing that I would point to being like a great pleasure of the film, is that it does feel like very Americana, you know?
Sure.
And I like that. And
frankly, if I can say another thing that's Americana about the villain of this film, it's that when he's talking to, I forget the father's name, in the jail cell, he describes his religion as the religion the Almighty and me worked out betwixt us.
Yes.
And that seems like it could be something like in a Flannery O'Connor, you know, story,
Totally.
right? In these stories about the kind of like strange forms that Christianity takes on in the South, where people are just sort of like making things up as they go along.
Yes.
And in this case, it's, you know, perhaps a worse form than in any of, you know, Flannery O'Connor's stories. But this kind of like what it makes me think of, honestly, actually, is things that we see in the church today, where you see like spiritual and like quasi pseudo mystical manipulation happening, especially in cases like with sexual abuse, or like Father Rupnik or whatever. There's often this kind of like this like unique spirituality that the sort of like the charismatic leader has worked out.
Yeah, right.
You know, and so that lack of kind of like actual like authority or religious authority or boundaries is just very susceptible to various forms of abuse. And so he's able to just manipulate people on religious grounds. And even though the things he's saying have very little, he has this, there's this famous sequence where with he has love and hate tattooed on the knuckles of his two hands. And this is referenced in the movie Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee. He does this whole like goofy speech about, you know, his hands wrestling each other and like love finally getting the upper hand over hate. But it's just like devoid of actual specifically Christian content, but everybody's so like impressed by it. Because there's kind of like this ignorance that I guess of like true religion that makes them susceptible.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the things that is really special about the film, is that it really has quite a lot of depth in the sort of psychological and the spiritual and the relational, you know, areas that it's exploring. You could see another film like this portraying a character like this and really leaving, you know, a negative comment about religion and its capacity for manipulation. But that's not this film at all. It doesn't shy away from that. And in fact, I think it's very sophisticated and incisive in the way that it shows how he's able to manipulate using religion and using people's feelings of uncleanness or unworthiness and the need for redemption and all of this to get them under his sway. But then, of course, we have this great counterpoint, this great foil in Lillian Gish's character towards the end of the film. The latter part, the children have gone downriver. They've been fleeing this man who's been pursuing them, and they finally arrive at her home. And she's an elderly lady. She's had a child or children of her own, but those have since grown, and now she's taking care of these children who are just sort of showing up at her doorstep. You know, children who don't have anywhere else to go, and she sort of shows us a picture of you know, real religion, real religion. But it's one, it's a tough religion too. It's one that's not naive, and so I think that's one of the most condemnatory things that you could see if he is pointing a finger at religion. It's at a kind of religion that is naive or self-serving. I'm thinking of this sequence with the mother, who very much does, you know, come under the sway of this killer, even after she has found out, you know, she's seen him for who she is and has put the pieces together and realized that he's after the money and that her son John is the one that knows. And it's like she's completely paralyzed. She's totally incapable of doing anything to defend herself or to defend her family.
Yeah.
She's just laying there like almost like she's Sleeping Beauty, waiting for...
She's ready to be sacrificed. You know, it's like a set... Well, we can talk about the scene where he kills her, but like it is really staged like a sacrifice or something, the way he stabs her from above.
Yeah,
and,
but, you know, the image of Sleeping Beauty comes to mind because she's laying there with her arms crossed, you know, and even after he slaps her, her face just returns back to this kind of stoic, almost like angel-like trance. And to me, it's so, well, it's heartbreaking on the one hand because you can see how she's been really victimized, but it's also a real indictment on the other hand against her as a mother, incapable of protecting her children. It's because she had a religiosity that was actually all about wishful thinking, perhaps, and not really looking at the world as it is.
I get the impression of this character. I would almost describe her as, it's like she doesn't even have much will to live. Almost like she's just a very broken character.
Well, it makes me think about how there are some animals that will freeze when they're in the face of a predator, you know, and this happens a lot. Yeah, I think just in human psychology, sometimes you're just frozen by evil and not knowing how to respond. And I think that that's a consequence of just being naive, of not being prepared for evil when it rears its head. Right.
Shelley Winters described her idea of the character as being like a fly that is fascinated by a spider and willingly goes into its web. Yes. And
it's a good
Laughton
image.
Encouraged her to play it that way.
Yeah.
Because there's this particular scene where she is coming up to the house at night and she hears Harry Powell, the serial killer, yelling at her son and demanding, or maybe her daughter, and demanding where the money is. And her reaction is very strange. Like, she's sort of startled, but she just comes into the house and doesn't really react.
It's an amazing performance.
She is a really very striking. Her expression is kind of like one of... she's almost like in a daze. Yeah. She's sort of like smiling in this confused way, and like... it's kind of it's like, oh yeah, this is a nightmare, but I don't know how to respond to it or something.
So she's been petrified. She's been petrified by this vision of evil for which she has no store, against or any preparation. Yeah. But it's really all of the characters, are kind of naive, or at the very least, head in the clouds. There is a conspicuous absence of men in a lot of the sequences. Yeah. We have this sort of establishing moment when the preacher has first arrived into town. They're all singing a hymn together, and there's maybe like one other man at this like picnic singing.
It's just
it's
the old
all
guy,
women. And the only men we do have, the husband of the husband-wife couple that run this candy shop, and the riverboat man, Uncle Bertie. Both of them have an intuition that something is off. We get moments from both of them sort of saying, well, I kind of have a bad feeling about this guy. And neither of them actually acts on that.
Well, Uncle Bertie is afraid that he himself will be suspected. He actually finds her body. Yeah. Yeah. And then,
but I'm talking about even before then, when he's on the boat and he initially, tells him, like, I don't know what's going on at your house, but if there's ever any trouble, you come to Uncle Bertie. Right. That shows that he knows that there's something off. Yeah. It's the same with the Candyman. And now that I think about it,
the Candyman sounds like a serial killer.
But now that I think about it, there is something kind of that's an interesting image in itself, that they run a candy shop. It's sweets.
These are friends of the mother, and she works there, right?
So it's no nutrition. It's like it's sweet, it's saccharine, it's superficial, and this is kind of their worldview. And it's a worldview that allows...
Especially the wife's worldview. Yeah.
Yes, and it allows this wolf to operate in the shadows and catch them by surprise.
Yeah, the sentimentality, which then turns itself at the end when, spoil it, he's been arrested. She's, leading the lynch mob, this old woman, and suddenly has turned against it as though she never, had anything to do with this guy in the first place. And she was, of course, encouraging Willa, the woman, to marry him.
Yep. But this is part of why I say it's a very complex and sophisticated depiction of these themes. Nothing is very simple or sort of tritely handled. There's real depth to the psychology and to the characterizations, even while there's a kind of powerful simplicity in the children's perspective that's kind of maintained throughout.
Right. Yeah. At a certain point, there's a lot of sort of setup in the film, and at a certain point, there's poetic things throughout, but there's a certain point in which more and more of the sequences are just incredibly beautiful and poetic.
Oh man!
And for me, maybe it starts almost with the wedding night sequence, where that sort of starts to take over the film. But first of all, we can talk about that room that they're in, that they're with the chapel, the bedroom, the mother's bedroom, with this kind of pointy chapel-like construction at the top of the house, which is then mirrored later on when they're in Lillian Gish's safe home. Yeah. And the children's bedroom has this kind of this silhouette of light in the same shape. So it's like these, the church and the anti-church set up against each other. Yeah, it's
and it's an important theme because there's a song, there's a refrain,
leaning on the everlasting arms.
Yes, that's invoked several times throughout the film, and it's this image of leading safe and secure from all alarm, all harm. Yeah, and this is there are kind of two sides to this. There is, of course, a real sense in which one can lean on Jesus and trust in Jesus, and you are safe. Right. But there's also the kind of the perverted, sort of half-realized version of that, which is just a naive security, one that doesn't want to admit to the existence of the snake in the garden. Right. And so I think that, that this is his refrain that he's always singing. It's almost like a lullaby that is lulling you to sleep, lulling you to a false sense of security so that he can take advantage of you. But then when it's sung in this amazing duet by Lillian Gish,
who's sitting there waiting with a shotgun while he lurks outside of her house,
and that's the real religion, she's really trusting in God, and that's what gives her the strength to stand up to this man, So it's such a beautiful. Talk about poetry. It's such an amazing image. This old lady, rocking in her wheelchair, singing Lean on Jesus, holding this shotgun. Oh man, it's such a cool film. But it's, to your point, it's beautifully shot. There's so many amazing images, and the use of lighting in this film, the characters moving in and out of shadow into light, the inversion of light and darkness, so awesome. The way light plays and reflects off of water and onto faces. There's great framing and the use of, layers, things in the foreground and in the background. So many sequences that look like they're just straight up pulled from an art film.
I think the most famous shot from this film is the film of her body in the car underwater.
Yes, so after he's killed the mother, he puts her in a car and, drives it off into the river. And we get this incredible, they must have shot it in a big aquarium or something, in a big tank. Because it's so clear, and we're getting this kind of seaweed blowing across the screen, even as her hair is
sort of this beautiful, haunting, ethereal, horrifying.
Yes, and the way that he layers that then with that song, the refrain, before we cut to him standing outside of the house singing it almost as a taunt to the children who are hiding inside. Before we've even cut to that and see it, we hear it as we're watching this beautiful, horrific, underwater sequence, it's such an interesting juxtaposition,
Right. But my personal favorite, and this is the part that like just like puts me into like submission every time I watch the film, and like gives me the chills, is the scene where they're floating down the river at night. The first of those scenes. There's many beautiful sequences of the river, but the first of those scenes where Pearl, the little girl, starts singing this sort of strange, ethereal folk song of some kind, and it's not really her voice, so it's this sort of like strangely mature but like still childlike singing voice, and you see that itself, it's a very haunting, beautiful song. But what's really interesting is the way that they shoot. There are all these shots of like the children floating down the river from like shot from the bank with like different like animals of the night, like in focus, and it creates this very kind of like fairy tale like environment of like sort of all the animals almost like observing what's going on, like a frog or like a hare. Later on, there's also a great shot of an owl swooping down on a hare. But yeah, it's great. And then they've got the part where they go on to land and they're looking at this house with a barn next to it, and they're looking in the window. There's this silhouette of a bird in a cage, which is like, it's almost like where they would like to be. Yeah. And then there's this barn, the way the light is against the barn. It's got this very like kind of, I don't know, how would you describe the aesthetic? Is it just expressionistic, or the way those particular scenes?
It's a dreamlike sequence. Yeah. There's a spider's web that is sort of imposed across the frame, and lots of interesting shots from above of the water rippling and the boat sailing through, and you kind of lose a sense of place or of time, and now you're just sort of on this cosmic journey down the river.
And then there's the scene where they're in the barn and they hear him singing from the road a distance away, and they see in the distance just his silhouette on a horse on the road.
It's death in pursuit, it's something out of like the Seventh Seal or something. So it's that sequence that you're talking about, I think, is probably one of the top cinematic moments ever, So if this film is easily in my top 10, that sequence is probably in my top 3 of cinematic moments. It's so well observed, and it speaks to another aspect to this film that really is a credit to the director, that I think is just so like totally a huge strength of the film and needs to be mentioned, is its sense of pacing. There's a great sense of timing in a lot of these sequences. And I'm not just talking about the way things are cut and the musicality. We haven't said anything about song in this. We haven't said much, at least, about song in this film. It's used to very good effect at a lot of different moments and in a lot of different ways. But there's even a musicality in the way that the story unfolds and visually. And also in the actions from the actors, in the gestures and the moments. I mean, we talked about this moment when he's going to kill the mother, who is paralyzed in the bed, and there's just these great expressionistic gestures that he performs, in the moonlight, with his hand raising up and sort of contorting, but it's all very, carefully.
Could be in like Nosferatu or something.
Yeah, but it's carefully choreographed, not just in terms of the angles and the images that are being captured, but also in the timing. And a lot of credit to, Robert Mitchum as a performer, that he's able to execute on that. But that's a director's vision, Right. There's another moment that's maybe less obvious. It's more subtle, but it's no less precise. It's this really tender moment between Lillian Gish and the little boy Johnny, where she's sort of sent the other children off to bed and tells him to first go get her an apple, and an apple for himself as well. And it's sort of at this point in their relationship where they haven't quite he hasn't totally relaxed into this relationship. He doesn't really trust her, you know. He has to have his guard up somewhat, you know, but he's also dealing with a lot, and she sees that. She knows that she can't really just get through to him and win his trust right away. But they share this really tender moment together where his hand just sort of ever so slowly creeps
it's really beautiful
onto her hand as well. And then there is this relaxing, and it's sort of punctuated with this bite into the apple that he takes. But it's the timing of that sequence. And, you know, if you watch it, there's like 3 or 4 things that are happening in concert, but all very precisely timed to create this really nice effect. And it's subtle, but it sort of speaks to this director's eye and his sense of timing that's really operating throughout the film.
Yeah. That's a great sequence too. I mean, and also it's going back to the nuance of the way that it deals with religion is she's reading from the Bible to the children, and the moment he sees the Bible, John sees the Bible, he sort of startles and leaves the room, because you can see he associates this with you know, predation. And she takes note of that, but then you see him standing outside the screen door and sort of his ears, you know, perking up when he hears her telling the story of Moses floating in the basket down the river. And so there's this, it's interesting because like most of the references to the Bible in the film up to that point have really been kind of just like aphoristic or moralistic, or, you know, not so much stories. But because he's able to recognize himself in that story, he's like intrigued and comes back in and asks her to talk to him about it. And you see this kind of like, you know, it's very interesting because she tells the story in this sort of generalized way. She's not just like reading straight from the Bible. I actually heard this thing from I forget if it was St. Jerome or St. John Chrysostom talking about like how to teach the Bible to like young children, and they're like, this whichever saint it was said, you know, don't just tell them this, like just like tell them the story as though you're making it up. Like don't use the names, just like tell them like the general outline of the story and like get them into the story. You don't need to give them any context, like just tell them the basic frame of the story. And so she's able to do that with him when he kind of recognizes himself in the person of Moses, but his memory is that she had talked about two kings, you know, floating in the basket, namely him and his sister, and she just kind of goes along with that because she sees that he's applying it to his own life, you know. So yeah, the way that she uses you know, scripture in this sort of delicate way that the children can enter into is great. And then this kind of respect that she has, this respect that she has for their experiences and what they've gone through. I mean, another sort of big subplot near the end of the film is this older teenage girl who lives with her, who's like sneaking out at night to go on dates with boys and stuff. And, you know, she kind of, when she comes and confesses to Lillian Gish's character, Lillian Gish says, you know, you were looking for love in the only like foolish way you knew how, or something like that. And so there's this kind of, I don't know, also looking ahead to the fact that there's this like lasting damage that's done that still needs to be tended to over the years. And I imagine, you know, John and Pearl still needing that love and needing that kind of that healing as time goes on. You know, it's not just like just because they're in a place that's safe now, they're going to be okay.
It's totally not the naive, sort of overly simplistic notion of religion or of you know, love that actually got them into this predicament to begin with. You know, it's a really robust one that recognizes, you know, not just the power of love, but also the resilience of children and like the real suffering that they have to endure. You
Yeah,
know?
which is what the film ends on.
Right. So you don't get that without acknowledging the suffering and the challenge and the hardness of the world, right? So this is something that's emphasized by the film and by this character and by this ending, that the world is a hard place.
Yeah, after the owl swoops down on the rabbit and she like hears the rabbit squealing,
Right.
she says it's a hard world for little things.
Yes, but it does put like an interesting point on, you know, our Lord's command to be like little children, you know, because in the end, it really ends up becoming an exhortation to be this resilient, to abide, you know,
Right.
that she is kind of childlike in this sense, you know, and if being an adult means what we've seen in the other adults, then I want to have none of that, you know. The only people that we see in the film who really have like a good head on their shoulders are this kindly old lady, but also the children, you know.
Right.
It's John who sees things as they are, you know, and who is able to actually be something for his little sister, you know.
Yeah. When the serial killer is finally arrested,
dude,
there's this really powerful scene mimicking where basically John reacts the same beat for beat the same way that he reacted when his father was getting sort of roughed up by the cops and put on the ground and arrested.
Yeah.
Which is this pained, like feeling the pain of it, you know, viscerally, and like protesting against it, saying no, don't, you know. Yeah, it's heartbreaking because you see this trauma that has stayed with him, and it's like he's experiencing that over again. But also, as you pointed out when we watched it, that there's kind of a this other character was not a true father to him, but you know, still standing in that place, and that's why it's upsetting,
right?
You
and
know?
Despite everything, he still feels, you know, some kind of connection to this man and some kind of grief at his being taken away in handcuffs, you know, that there is like somehow this complicated trauma and tragedy inside this relationship as well. You know?
Yeah. Because it's interesting because most of his reactions before that were like him like smirking and saying like, he's not my dad. And kind of there's never any affection between them at all.
Right.
But at the end, then you still see like this wound, you know?
So again, another example of just how, you know, complicated this film can be, you know, and its look at these characters and what they're going through. But it's really heartbreaking to watch, you know. Yeah. And then it's sort of underlined after that because we get a shot of John in the courtroom where you know, Robert Mitchum's character is being put on trial, and all we have is the hand of an adult, you know, pointing across the screen saying, "Is that the man who did all these things?"
Yeah.
And John won't even look. He won't look. He won't say anything. It's like he's already played too much of a part in the squabbles of these adults and is no longer going to bear the weight of that, you know. He's not going to bear the weight of condemning this man to hang. You know, you guys can do that on your own.
Yeah. And the film ends at Christmas.
Yeah.
Which is, there's a line from Miss Cooper, the Lillian Gish character, where she says something about like, I don't remember the exact words, but she basically says, you'd think with this holiday being about God becoming a child, people would like treat children better or something like that.
Yeah.
It's about these particular characters, this particular time, but also this kind of like this sort of just like perennial struggle that happens, like the struggle between good and evil, and also just like the fallout for children with like the vices of adults, you know. It manages to end on this like very uplifting note. And yet, like, all of the sort of the suffering is acknowledged.
Still intact, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does make you think a little bit differently about the way the film opens, because when the film opens, we don't know who this old lady is, you know, who she's talking to or why she's saying these things. And it's interesting because we won't know who she is for most of the film until she shows up, you know, rather toward the end.
Right.
But it does make me think, like, it puts us in the position of being the children who are being spoken to. In that opening sequence, she's speaking directly to the camera. So it's almost as though there's this direct address when she's reminding the children of what she's told them before. You remember what we've talked about, you know, and you remembered that I've told you not to judge lest you be judged, you know, and all of us watching this are thinking, yes, yeah, I remember when you told me that. You know, she becomes like the icon, the archetype of you know, the mother passing on the gospel. And so I just kind of wonder if that isn't part of Charles Laughton's intent with this, you know, to sort of place us in the position of children and to try to, you know, as fantasy does, you know, kind of wake us up to these parts of reality, you know. Describing this as a fairy tale is to its credit. It's not to sort of trivialize it or try to qualify it. It's really to say that it's dealing with the most essential things. It's dealing with archetypal, primitive things that are really like the pieces of all stories, you know, and it's the stuff that we always need to hear again and again. It's also what makes it just a pleasure, right? So it's for all of its, you know, richness, its literary richness and its visual and artistic, you know, accomplishment. It's also just a totally thrilling film to watch. And you mentioned that it has these elements of horror. Like, really, it's a monster movie. It is a monster movie, and this character is the monster. We even get that kind of represented visually when he's chasing them up the stairs from the cellar. He has his arms outstretched, you know, as though he's Frankenstein or something. He's growling at them behind the
Well, there's
the
something
door.
of like, again, going back to the fairy tale, there's something of like fee fi fo fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Like,
but it's like, this is why you tell children stories about monsters, because monsters are real. And we see that here. This is a real monster. He's a real big bad wolf, you know?
Well, the first time I watched this movie, I was like, man, this really reminds me of Stephen King. And I looked it up. Like, I Googled him in connection with this. And it turns out that he did read the novel that it's based on, was influenced by it. Cool. And there's something about how he deals with children in peril, and something about how he deals with sort of cosmic battle between good and evil, particularly in It and in The Stand. There's there in The Stand, there is sort of an old prophet lady who lives out in the woods, who's like sort of gathering all the good people to her. And then there's this very similar kind of wandering, preternaturally, demonically driven seeming man, Randall Flagg, who is not unlike the character, the serial killer character in this film. So yeah, it's interesting. This film has had a lot of influence on later directors as well. But again, it's one of those things that unfortunately wasn't very successful at the time that it came out. But I think that it is. I think it's a great one for people to watch, because it really is exactly what it needs to be for what it is. I know that's kind of like a strange way of saying, but like, you know what I mean? So I mean, I read a quote from one of the critics who didn't like it when it came out, and he was saying, oh, it's this story first, and then it makes the mistake of turning into this like sort of drama between good and evil in this sort of like cosmic or like abstracted
what a weird
sense. Like he felt he felt like it turned from like a very particular story into this sort of like mythical kind of thing, and he felt that was a flaw. But no, I mean, that perfectly fits the way that real life sort of like touches on those things. And what I meant in my very like seemingly meaningless comment about it being what it needs to be is that it's not like chopped down to fit a genre.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, oh, well, I don't get it. Like, what kind of film is this? Like, what genre is this?
Right.
Like, is this a comedy or is it a drama? Like, I can't like enjoy it until I know, you know, and some people are like that. And certainly a lot of Hollywood and a lot of artists are like that. Like they kind of like chop it down to fit this particular mold. But this film is able to draw on a lot of different things. And to me, it feels, it feels cohesive.
Yes,
and
yes.
who would have thought that film noir visuals and expressionist visuals could meet with like a serial killer / fairy tale,
Yeah.
story
In the rural South.
in the rural South. Yeah. So, but it works wonderfully. And, it is one of my absolute favorite. Films.
Another comparison that actually is just coming to mind now. And so, I don't, have this thought very well developed, but it also makes me think of Cormac McCarthy, and in particular the character of Judge Holden in Blood Meridian.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
This is, a similar kind of, evil incarnate kind of character who at the same time is
is a man.
Yeah.
He's a man.
He's a man.
Human limits.
And very charming, and has a way with words, and people fall under his spell. But there's also something kind of inhuman about him.
Right, or the character in Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men.
Right.
Which is like, again, it's interesting because he comes off as this like unstoppable monster, and yet there's moments where you see him in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah.
And the same thing I think happened to this film.
Right.
Is like, to the children, he seems like, especially from a child's point of view, he seems like this like preternatural monster, but yet he is able to get shot at and yelp and scream and run away, and
Right.
and it is interesting. I wonder if this is a kind of a distinctly American type of villain too.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering too. You said the director was British, English?
Well, I don't know his exact background, but on Wikipedia it describes him as a British and American actor.
Okay,
so I don't know if that just means he moved here and became an American
but it's
citizen.
just, because of the
He had a British
comparisons with Flannery O'Connor, I think that's a really good comparison as well. This sort of like lives in that same space. It does make you wonder if there is something singularly American about this kind of a figure.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to read the book sometime and see what that's all about.
Yeah.
But that's about all we have to say about this. But
it's an easy recommendation to make. This film is so good. You should totally watch it.
Yeah.
And you can watch it. I think it's on Amazon Prime for streaming.
Yeah.
And I've seen it come on and off the Criterion channel.
Right.
So you can go there.
Yeah. So anyway, until next time, listeners, thanks for listening. And if you want to see more from what we're up to, you can go to catholicculture.org. We've got more going on than just this podcast, including a lot of written materials. All right, everybody. Thanks, and see you next time.
Criteria is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Jim Papandrea, Catholic Culture audiobooks bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, an interview show exploring Catholic arts, culture, and issues. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical resources, and much more at CatholicCulture.org.